Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Kirsty and this is Stuck in the Mud. Thank you all for being here today and joining me on this journey into the unknown where we fearlessly break the cycle with OCD and anxiety. And I'm honoured that you're here doing this with me today. In today's video, I wanted to talk about how to leave your OCD thoughts alone. And I often talk about this in my videos and it sounds so simple and easy, but to someone suffering from OCD and anxiety, it can be quite challenging to do this. So I wanted to break it down for you guys in a step-by-step pattern, and this is where we get our freedom back from obsessive compulsive disorder. And when we approach recovery, as in we're not trying to stop intrusive thoughts, because that is just like chasing your tail, in all honesty. I spent years trying to do this where I just wanted it to stop, and that never worked. Instead, we embrace these intrusive, unwanted thoughts, as hard as that is. And any thought is allowed, any thought that comes along, and we approach it differently. We resist engagement with them. We also build a tolerance to them, and we're going to feel a lot of uncertainty and discomfort with that. But that is part of the process of actually healing. And we also want to resist those urges to engage in any rituals that come along, whether that's physical rituals or mental rumination. So how does this all work? Step one. The thoughts aren't actually the problem, it's how we respond to them. We can notice a thought arising or an urge to complete a ritual like checking or repetitive behaviours. Our initial reaction is, this is terrible, I can't believe I'm even thinking this. And we may be feeling some guilt and shame alongside it. We desperately want to try and get this out of our head. Understandably, we don't like it, which is sure to backfire in the end. We try to work out and problem solve and analyse and give us certainty and peace that this thought doesn't mean something bad about us, or maybe that someone is safe, for example. We're engaging, which is actually us doing that, as hard as that was for me to accept that. And I'm not putting this on anyone. This isn't your fault that you're suffering like this. But I had to have my therapist help me understand that this is me engaging with it that's actually keeping the OCD alive. And we often feel like this is automatic because it's just the natural process that we engage in. We don't have that rational side of our brain. It's kind of faulty in a way, and which leads to that cognitive distortion. And we then maintain these obsessions and rituals that we engage in, but we can recalibrate our brain with hard work, by responding to these thoughts and sensations and urges very differently. And it's taken me a long time to really understand that and get to grips with it, but I realised that this is within my power. Step number 2, when we bring awareness to these OCD brain processes, we can do something about this. We can notice the intrusive thought arising and maybe the urge to complete a ritual. And we let it be there by noticing its presence. We're not going to try and push it away because that's just going to make it come back 10 times stronger. And there's a lot of scenarios that we can use to bridge that gap for when we actually notice the thought arise, because this is something that I don't really do anymore, but it really did help me initially when I was learning this kind of therapy, metacognitive therapy, detached mindfulness. It made it much easier to do something about these thoughts and leave them there. So the first thing is, you could think of it as a toddler having a tantrum. You don't need to engage with that child like the thought. You don't need to engage with it. It will just fizzle out on its own. So that's one way. Or maybe you can think of it as a thought, as a train arriving at the station. It pulls in, The door's open, but you don't get on board. You don't try and figure it out again with the thought. You can think of it as this type of scenario, if that helps you. Some may speak to you more than others. And another one might be that someone rings the doorbell, but you don't go and answer it. You don't have to answer it. Another one might be a cold caller. You see the number come up and you think, no, I don't know who that is. I don't need to answer it. Just like a thought. It might pop up in your brain, but you don't need to pick it up. Let me think of some others. Another one could be a leaf on a stream. You can observe that leaf floating along. Just as a thought, you can observe it there, but you don't need to go and pick it up or don't need to figure out that thought. And another one could be clouds. That's quite a well-recognised way of handling these kind of thoughts, is just think of your thoughts like clouds just passing through the sky until they fizzle out and they're gone from your eyesight. They just fizzle out on their own. And whichever you prefer, you can use any of these things, and eventually you won't need to do that. That's not something I really do anymore, but it really was helpful initially. And you can let them coexist with you, these thoughts and urges, until they fade out on their own, which they will do. It doesn't feel like it at first because you're going to feel a lot of discomfort and anxiety alongside it because you're not engaging with OCD, but that does get easier, believe me. Number 3, you're not trying to distract yourself or run away from these thoughts. We're being bold against OCD here. It's a bully. It really is. And we're leaving all those questions and what ifs unanswered, which is hard to do at first. I'll be honest. It's not easy, this, but it really does work. We're not trying to analyze anything or come to any kind of conclusion. We move forward doing the things that we enjoy and love, or even the ordinary day-to-day activities like stacking the dishwasher, putting the washing in. We're leaving all these thoughts alone, letting them play out as long as they want until they subside on their own, which they will. When you do this work, you notice that it does happen. You can also postpone thinking about these things till later, and then when later comes, you postpone again. That's another way of handling these kind of thoughts. And we're building that resistance and tolerance, which only gets easier and stronger over time. And step number 4, you don't beat yourself up when you have a relapse or a setback in your recovery. You haven't failed. It can often feel like, oh, I've done it again. You might notice that you're way along, like you've been thinking about something for 10 minutes, half an hour, you're engaged and you're Googling, you're asking for reassurance, all these kind of behaviors that we exhibit with OCD. We're involved. That's okay. It happens to us all. We all have setbacks in this recovery, and that's okay. We need a lot of self-compassion in recovery. That is what I've learned along the way. And we can look at these as, instead of failures, we look at them as opportunities to practice what we know next time. This is not, we're flying in the face of OCD. We're letting life happen, and this is the most important step in recovery. We're not doing what it wants us to do. We're getting our life back from this and taking the power back and the control it has over us. And step number 5, this is really important. Recovery is not the absence of intrusive thoughts. We can often think of that is the goal of getting better from OCD and anxiety, but it really isn't, because, it's natural to have anxious thoughts. Obsessive thoughts will lessen over time with, in frequency and volume, the more we practice this. But it's how we respond to them. That is the big breakthrough. Our brain is learning that we're not on high alert. We're not in a state of emergency every time these thoughts crop up. and every time an intrusive thought enters our brain, we're not like, I need to figure this out straight away. We're practicing, non-engagement. We're letting these thoughts be there. It's important that we're not trying to ignore them either, because ignoring is sending a message to our brain that it doesn't have any right to be there. Any thought is allowed. That is a really important thing I learned from my therapist, is any thought can enter your brain. It doesn't define you. These thoughts will often, they go against our values and who we are as people, because OCD plays on that. And it really does cause so much distress to us, because, this is not who we are. But unfortunately, that's how OCD works. It will often try to tell you that this isn't OCD, when in fact it really is. And once we can really understand that and understand the processes and how it works, we can do something about it by following the steps I'm laying out in this video. Our brain is learning all the time. The more we can leave those thoughts alone, our brain will understand that we don't need to do anything about this, because they will fade out on their own. That's how this therapy works. It's so wonderful when we realise that all the engagement is actually keeping this going, and this is really how we get better. Honestly, I really do. I'm such an advocate for this kind of therapy, because I've been in such devastating places, some really scary places with OCD, where I just couldn't function at all. I was in the worst place, rock bottom, and I don't wish that on anyone. So I really hope this video has really laid it out for you, and how we can actually approach this and how we leave thoughts alone. Because I really wanted to do a standalone video, because I mentioned this in lots of my videos, but I really wanted to make it easier to understand. So I really hope this video has helped you see what needs to be done to actually get better and heal. So let me know what you think about this video in the comments, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for watching.